After initially telling reporters that the government lacked the resources to fight the fires in the Amazon rainforest, and now under increasing international pressure, Brazilian President Bolsonaro late today signed an order deploying federal troops finally to battle the fires. This comes amid dire warnings from scientists that say losing just 20% of Brazil's rainforest could accelerate global warming. As Business Insider reports, quote, these fires, coupled with deforestation losses, could destroy so many trees that they trigger a doomsday scenario for the world's largest rainforest, called a dieback. The process would turn the Amazon into an African savanna-type landscape. The tropical trees and the fauna they support would disappear, releasing up to 140 billion tons of stored carbon into the atmosphere and causing an uptick in already rising global temperatures. My God. For more, I'm joined by David Wallace Wells, deputy editor at New York Magazine, author of The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming. Well, David, tell us as bad as it looks to you, because we don't know. The American viewer watching right now wants to know why this is so dire.
It just undermines everything that we want to do to stabilize the planet's climate. Every tree that's on the planet sucks carbon out of the atmosphere and produces oxygen, which means it's basically our best tool in combating climate change. And the Amazon is the biggest collection of that plant life out there. It's doing the most photosynthesis and sucking all that carbon out of the atmosphere. That means that even before we get to a dieback scenario where the Amazon collapses into a savanna, which is still a ways away, all of those trees which store carbon are today burning, releasing carbon into the atmosphere. It's as though we're having huge coal plants going out of control in the Amazon in a place that used to actually absorb carbon. So we don't have to wait for this to impact our climate change hopes. It's already undermining them quite dramatically today.
Well, put it all together. When we see these giant icebergs breaking off from the Arctic, and we look at this in that part of the world, and we look at the warfare going on in the Horn of Africa, and we see it all. Isn't this the sign from God or whoever that this is happening? It's all happening. It's not scientific theory. We're watching it.
I think the last couple of years have showed us exactly that. Every summer now we're having record heat waves. Europe is about to have its third record heat wave already this summer. They set records, then a week later they set records again, then now a month later we're going to set records again. There are extreme heat records now being set in China. We're having, in places like Mozambique, historic storms followed a month later by storms that are just as bad. We're having unprecedented wildfires, not just in the Amazon, as we're talking about, but in California, in the Arctic Circle, in Siberia, there were fires that burned through an area the size of Austria just a few weeks ago. And this was, as you say, just a few years ago, something that we could only read about in predictions and projections. Now we're seeing it every night on our TV screens. And that's because the world is now at just 1.1 degrees of warming, hotter than it's ever been in all of human history. And we're almost certain to get almost twice as much warming as we have today. And if we don't do anything about it, perhaps 3 or 4 times as much warming, which would produce truly catastrophic outcomes for the planet. The total loss of those ice sheets, which could mean 260 feet of sea level rise. We could have a global GDP by the end of the century that was 30% smaller than it would be without climate change, which is an impact that's twice as deep as the Great Depression, and it would be permanent. And there are many, many more impacts besides. Now, those impacts are still a century away, and there's a lot we can do to avoid them. But the impacts that are much closer are just as scary. At just 2 degrees, which is likely where we'll be in 2040 or 2050, many of the biggest cities in South Asia and the Middle East will be literally unlivably hot in summer. You won't be able to go outside during summer without dying. That's why the UN thinks that we could have 200 million climate refugees just by 2050. They actually think it's possible we could have 1 billion, which is as many people as today live in North and South America combined. I think those estimates are a little high, but even if you take the low end figure, divide it in half, it's still literally 100 times as big as the European refugee crisis that was produced by the Syrian civil war, which has totally scrambled the politics of that continent. And I think that's one of the really interesting emerging stories we're seeing in this Amazon rainforest news cycle, but also more broadly, which is how global geopolitics is playing into this crisis. Not just how will politics respond, but how will climate force the hand of our leaders and perhaps push us in directions we never anticipated? The kinds of pressure that Macron is talking about and will probably be applied at the G7. This is something that no leaders contemplated just a few years ago, imposing sanctions or suspending trade deals in order to push leaders into line on the climate. I think personally, I think it's necessary, but it's also a completely different world politically than we were living in even just a few years ago with the signing of the Paris Accords.
Let's talk about politics. We have so-called populist leaders like Bolsonaro in Brazil, Trump in the United States. We have nationalist right-wing leaders in Hungary and places like that in Europe. They're exploiting anger over cultural change, over immigration. At the same time, they're fanning the flames, literally, of the reason for the immigration.
Yeah, it's a really toxic cocktail. And I think that phenomenon all around the world, and it's especially tragic when you think about it in terms of climate change, in the sense that if you had to imagine a global threat that was big enough, all-encompassing enough, and serious enough to really call the world into coordinated global action, climate change would be it. That's how big it is. That's how dangerous it is. And yet we're facing this catastrophe, this crisis, precisely at the moment when so many of the world's leaders are retreating from those arrangements and those alliances, pulling back into nativism and xenophobia and a sort of narrowly defined sense of self-interest, which is exactly what Bolsonaro is doing with the Amazon. His country can benefit enormously economically by exploiting the resources of that region, in part because of trade deals with countries in the EU and the US. We're essentially paying Brazil to deforest the Amazon. But it's also the case that Brazil is only going to have to shoulder a very small slice of the burden for what happens. The rest of the world will have to deal with most of it. And so we need a kind of a system, I think, to evolve in which we line up these incentives so that each individual nation is not encouraged to behave badly for their own narrow benefit while the rest of the world suffers.
David, thank you so much. The social costs are well beyond the cost to that country. Thank you so much. You're a very compelling spokesman for the need to act. Thank you so much.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.